Baker of the New York Times, one of my favorite reporters out there. Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Good. Peter, I have you and Amy Walter to either blame or thank for the reaction to my Washington Post column, which, I've been writing columns for 40 years, since 1985, really, and thousands of them. I have never had this kind of reaction. 8,500 comments at the Washington Post. On Twitter, there were 9,700 replies, 8,000 retweets, and 20,000 likes. I think you started it and Amy started it. And you just
Is that
kind of
right?
I,
Well, I just, I thought it was an interesting column. I tweeted it out. I was happy to do it. You make the case, and people ought to read everybody's point of view, and that's. But I guess they did.
oh my goodness, it's amusing. Then the president retweeted it on Sunday morning. It started all over again. And I just think you and Amy are among the two most respected reporters inside the Beltway for being fair. So my question is, are people more on edge this election season than you've ever seen them before? Because that's my impression.
I think that's true. I think it's a very polarized moment. I think people have made up their minds a long time ago. They feel very strongly one way or the other, and I think that social media has a way of being a bullhorn rather than a conversation tool, right? So people have strong feelings. They're going to use social media to enhance that kind of conversation. We're not having a conversation. We're just shouting at each other.
Yeah, the amplification. I was actually a lot of blue check lefties got very upset with my column, and I was glad because they retweet it and it goes everywhere. It gets read. I don't mind if people hate it, provided they retweet it. And I like people who like it. When the president retweets, you pick up 10,000 additional retweets. So it was great. But at the same time, the commentary is, if you dip into it, just blue check, it's much more personal than it ever was before. I don't understand this turn towards incendiary personal attacks. Have you noticed that?
It is. No, it's very personal. It's very incendiary. I was just saying with Dwayne, it's hard to have a conversation in 140 characters anyway. It's hard to get across any kind of nuanced point. And so I think that people really feel strongly, passionately, angrily on across the board, and there's no middle ground. I think at this point.
Well, but it used to be. Well, maybe I'm forgetting 1968 because I'm a kid in 1968. I'm 12 years old, but there's always been a baseline level of civility which is missing this year, and the left will blame Trump and Trump will blame the left, but it really is absent. Let me turn to the story you wrote this morning because I got a little background on this. I have a brother who just retired after 30 plus years as a PhD research toxicologist for one of Big Pharma. Been doing kidney drugs for 30 years. He is very optimistic about a vaccine with one problem. We're running out of subjects. There are so many trials for so many therapeutics and vaccines that we don't have enough people. Your article is on vaccines and politicization. He's not worried about politicization because of the downside to professional careers if people politicize their trials. They're finished. But did you run into this story that we are running out of people to test?
I hadn't heard that part, but I did talk to some scientists, and what they were saying is that they had actually intentionally double the pool. So there are two now phase 3 trials. That's the final phase of the trials, and in both those cases, the scientists made the pharmaceuticals have 30,000 test subjects rather than 15,000, which would have been typical. And part of the reason is because you have more, you're going to get more data earlier, right? If you want to speed it up, and that is everybody's goal, if you can do it safely, then their thinking was you'll have better data if you have 30,000 rather than 15,000, and you might be able to get it done sooner than if you had a smaller pool. But I hadn't heard the part about not having enough people willing to do it. That's an interesting question.
It's not just in vaccines, but Dr. Hewitt, the smart guy in the family, said the therapeutic trials, there are hundreds of them. People are trying all sorts of different things, and that finding the number of people. He also mentioned abroad, AstraZeneca is having a very good, successful run, and he just believes that we're going to have a couple of options by the end of the year. I note that you report on emergency approvals. I don't think that there's any way that an efficacious vaccine, or even one with a 3/4 efficacy, doesn't get an emergency approval. Do you, Peter? I mean, the country needs it.
Well, this is the question, right? So, for your listeners, what emergency use application authorization would be, where the FDA said, okay, we're gonna call. We're not gonna wait till the end of trials because we think we've got enough data to safely put out an effective vaccine. And this would be a fraught debate under any circumstance, because if you get it wrong, obviously there's great consequence. You don't want to get it wrong. And so this would be a consequential and hard debate under any circumstance. Then you overlay a political calendar on it, it becomes much more so, right? Because then questions are going to be asked. Well, are we doing it early because we're trying to give Trump something to announce before the election or not? Or are we doing it based on the science? The White House says we'll base it on the science, but a lot of people are suspicious. And that's a hard moment, because you're right. People can't afford to wait if 1,000 people are dying every day if we've got an efficacious, effective vaccine. On the other hand, if you could put something into 300 million people, you've got to make sure you get it right. And that's a really hard dilemma, I think.
Yeah, it is. It will be. I just believe the demand for the public, especially because of schools, will overwhelm the traditional caution. And again, brother, the doctor, the toxicologist, no doctor, no PhD wants to get this wrong. You're ruined if you get this wrong, and your company is ruined. They have some liability protections. You're just ruined. So I'm not worried about that. I would like to get your sense, Peter, on whether we've turned a corner. And here's my data set. April was the worst month. We had 2,386 deaths on April 18th. I went back and looked at cases on April 1, 28,000 cases led, the death is always a lagging indicator. 28,000 cases on April 1, 2,386 deaths on April 18. Well, on July 19, we had 63,698 cases. We're getting pretty close to our high point. Move forward to August 1st, we have 1,133 deaths. We are obviously getting better at treating this. That's my conclusion. Do you agree with it?
Well, I'm not a doctor. I mean, it does feel like that they have gotten. What you hear from doctors is that they're better at treating it. Yes, once you get to the hospitals are in better shape than they were. They've got better equipment and they know what to do more. Some of these patients are younger, but the deaths are coming back up. That's the worrying thing. You say it's a lag indicator. That's right, and it had been down to like 300 a day or something like that. We're up to 1,000, 1,200 a day. And the question is, what do you have to do to flatten that curve and make it go back down again? And we're in a bad place compared to a lot of these European countries. I did the research over the number that, Spain and France and Italy are single digits or double digits of deaths per day compared to us at 1,000 or 1,200. So that's a worrying trend.
Do you have a opinion on the Swedish model? Because that is going to be the control case for every country. Sweden went with isolating the elderly and the infirm, and everybody carry on. And it looks like it worked, Peter Baker.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it lately. I know it's been the source of a lot of debate because they did everything different than everybody else, but I haven't looked at what's happened lately there to see how it's worked out. So I wouldn't want to venture opinion on something I don't really know about.
So in terms of newsroom stories, COVID is ubiquitous, but it's also repetitive. How much do your editors want you to move on to, say, for example, the vice presidential selection, which the Post is leading with today as being a stumbling block for Joe Biden, who stumbled out of the gates with the VP thing? How much do they want you to stay on COVID, and how much do they want you to move on to the race?
Well, I do the White House, so I don't do Biden's VP pick. That's not my area. But we're trying to do all these things. You're right. I mean, COVID coverage had kind of, tapered off a little bit as the cases have tapered off. It's kind of come back with the numbers being so bad. But we also have to cover these other issues because there are a lot of things going on, and including the negotiations with the Hill on the relief package. There's a lot of stake, a lot of money at stake. The economy is in such tenuous place that we need to cover that. Obviously, the Portland issues and things like that are all out there. But the COVID thing is a dominant issue, and it's hard to get away from it. But you're right. It may feel repetitive. We need to find fresh ways of making sure we're capturing the story as it develops and as it evolves.
Exit question, Peter. I saw an image flash yesterday, which I think has traveled on part of the internet. People were burning Bibles in Portland. Now, that's only 3 or 4 people throwing a half dozen Bibles onto a fire, but it's the kind of picture that jars. Did you see it? Have you followed that story?
I didn't see that picture. Obviously, book burning of any sort is pretty anathema. and that would be counterproductive to whatever point they're trying to make, I would guess.
I go look for it. It's one of those things that came across my radar last night, and I said that is going to end up having legs. Peter Baker, New York Times. Follow him on Twitter at Peter Baker NYT. Follow me to the next segment, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Near Dark by Brad Thor.